Chapter 22 Return and Discovery. It was fully dark by the time Kenny, Torin, and Lizzie came staggering into the village, having walked at a breakneck pace for several hours. When they got to Dr. Hester's house, Torin ran up the path and flung open the door.
"We're back!"
he shouted.
"Come here, everyone! We have to tell you something important!"
Lizzie and Kenny crowded in behind him. It was warm in the house. The fire burned brightly. In a moment Mrs. Murdo stepped out of the kitchen with a spoon in her hand, and when she saw them, she halted and gazed at them, puzzled. "Torin," she said, "where have you been all day?" Poppy trotted out after her, but she barely looked at Torin and the rest.
"I want some!"
she cried, tugging on Mrs. Murdo's shirt tail.
I want some! Right now!"
Mrs. Murdo patted her absent-mindedly. "In a moment," she said.
"We found out where they are!"
yelled Torin.
"Who?"
said Mrs. Murdo. "Hello, Kenny. And Lizzie?" She trailed off, sensing an odd level of excitement. "What are you talking about?"
"Lena and Dune!"
cried Torin.
"Someone has to go and rescue them!"
"Rescue them?" said Mrs. Murdo.
"From what? Lena's down at the hotel."
Maddie came in the back door and gazed calmly at this gathering. She held a basket in one hand that looked to be full of weeds. She said. "What's going on?"
"I was the one who figured out where they went,"
said Lizzie,
"after Kenny said they were gone."
"Gone?" said Mrs. Murdo, looking more and more confused.
"I want some now,"
Poppy whined. Torin jumped up and down in front of Mrs. Murdo.
"The shepherd told us,"
he shouted.
"Lena's up there, and Dune is too. They have to be rescued."
At that point, Mrs. Murdo put her hands on her hips and looked stern. "All right," she said. "I'm missing something. Anyone want to explain?" Poppy started to cry.
"What's the matter with Poppy?"
Lizzie asked Mrs. Murdo. "She's hungry," Mrs. Murdo said. "I've taken the last of the olive oil and was just frying a few potatoes, and she can't wait to have some."
"Maybe we could all have some,"
Lizzie said. So they crowded in front of the fire, eating fried potatoes. There were just enough for 3 slices each, and Kenny and Lizzie and Torin told their story, all of them interrupting each other and talking in a great urgent rush. Mrs. Murdo looked more and more horrified, and by the time they were finished, she was clutching the arms of her chair and glaring at them. "The town leaders need to know about this right away!" She stood up and glared at Kenny and Torin and Lizzie. "You 3, she said. "Come with me." All that afternoon, Dune had slept, and Lena had sat beside him, thoughts swirling through her mind of all that had happened in the short time, not even 3 whole days, since they'd set out on their trip. They'd left the door of the room partway open. Light came in, and chilly air, and a few flying bugs, but no sound of animals or human beings. At about midday, Lena got out more of the food from Mags, and they both ate. Then Dune slept again. Finally, the daylight began to wane, and the trees outside became a tangle of shadows. It grew colder, too, and Lena knew they'd have to prepare for the night, make the fire, eat the last of their food. She awoke Dune to look at his ankle, and was shocked at how swollen and dark it was, like a big purple fruit. "I should be able to walk fine tomorrow," Dune said, but his voice was full of doubt. He sat up and leaned against the wall. "I can't stop thinking about the diamond," he said.
"But you don't know what it was,"
said Lena.
"No, but I looked underneath it, just for a second, when I came out of the cave, and I saw wires. It reminded me of when I used to take plugs apart in Ember to see how electricity worked. Wires were inside them." "So maybe it was a light," said Lena. "But still, one light, I don't see why that would have made much difference to anything."
"Maybe not," said Dune.
"But the strange thing is, it was here, right next to the way out of Ember, waiting for us. It was meant for us, just like
He stopped. Lena thought he was too upset to finish his sentence, but the look on his face changed. The sad, heavy look went away, and a look of surprise took its place. With his mouth hanging open and his eyebrows lifted up, Dune stayed speechless, as if suddenly turned to stone.
"What?"
Lena finally said.
"Just like what?"
"Just like the boat in the room," said Dune.
"There was one boat, remember? And we thought, why just one boat for all the people in the city?" "Yes, we were wrong, because really that was just a sample, and once you found the secret door, there were lots of boats,"
Lena said.
"But you had to know how to find them,"
Dune cried.
"You mean there might be more?"
Lena asked.
"More diamonds?"
"There might!" cried Dune.
"We have to try."
He struggled to stand up, moving so fast that he turned his injured ankle and said, "Yow!" very loudly, and just barely managed to stay on his feet.
"There was a steel panel in the boat room in Ember," he said, "and inside it a key. But I don't see anything like that here, do you?"
"No," said Lena. She lit a candle because the light from outside was nearly gone, and walked with it around the edges of the room. The walls looked perfectly smooth to her. There was nowhere for a key to be hidden, and no keyhole to put it in.
"The instructions would have been in the book," said Dune, "if that shepherd hadn't burned up the pages. Let's try anyhow."
He placed his hands on the wall behind him and ran them up, sideways and down. Lena jumped up. She stood the candle in a blob of its own melted wax in the middle of the room.
"What are we looking for?" "Anything that's different from the rest," Dune said. "A dent? A bump? I don't know." They patted their hands over the entire rear wall of the room. If this was like the boat room, the rear wall was the one that should lead somewhere. Lena set up the table and stood on it to reach the high parts, and Dune did the low parts by scooching along the floor, but every inch of the wall, as far as they could tell, felt the same, smooth and hard. So they moved on to the side walls. They pressed harder. Frustrated, they banged with their fists in a few places, thinking maybe they'd shake something loose. But the room stayed the same. No panels opened. No doors slid aside. At last they set themselves to go over the wall where the entrance was. They were tired by now and losing hope, but they kept on, and after a while Lena thought she felt a very slight seam in the wall. It was just to the left of the doorway. "This might be something," she said. "Feel it?"
Dune felt where she pointed.
"Yes, just a hair of a crack. Try pressing beside it."
Lena pressed. Dune put his hand next to hers, and they both pressed. And a small, flat door sprang open, startling them both so much that they stumbled backward.
"Got it!"
cried Dune, who had sat down hard on the floor. He struggled up, standing mostly on one foot. Lena was peering inside the opening, and Dune looked over her shoulder. What they saw was simply a handle, set vertically in the box-like opening. To the left, the word "off" was printed, and to the right, the word "on."
"Shall I do it?"
said Lena. Dune nodded. She gripped the handle and pulled it to the right. It moved stiffly, but there was a satisfying click when it locked into place. And then came a grinding, a creaking, and the walls began to move. They jumped away and stared. On both sides of them, solid panels were sliding upward, revealing, all down the length of the room, shelves built within the walls from floor to ceiling, and on the shelves, lined up in neat rows, were blue diamonds, exactly like the one that Dune had broken.
"Dozens of them,"
Lena breathed.
"Hundreds," said
Dune.
"They're so beautiful."
In the light of the single candle, the diamonds glimmered softly, blue as the evening sky before the stars come out.
"Our diamonds," whispered Dune. "The diamonds meant for the people of Ember."
He gazed at them, his eyes gleaming.
"Now," he said, "if only we knew what they were for."